There you go. That's the match. Because you gotta get up and later. I told my cousin, but I feel bad. I know, yes. I'm using days in my life to start. That's how I said, watch. I do my bike and I watch an episode of Days of Our Lives. Yeah. Much fun. Just about it. No, that's the only thing I can watch. Yeah. So, that's what's working for me. Yeah. But I just we did. Yeah, I bet. It was. I bet. And I enjoyed it so much. No question. This is a fun read. Alright, well, alright, perfect. Sounds good. Yeah. That's how Charlie's doing. Yeah, I think 5 p.m. I know she's been saying this. Okay, then I'll just share. Yeah. Yeah.
it was great. Yeah, it was lunch. We had a great time. I had this. Usually, we're all tailgating outside, and then it's the last possible bit of a tailgate, and then we get and everybody was very friendly. Because I had my name stuff. Everybody was very yeah, like the guest service. Anytime someone saw us there.
Everybody, good morning. We should probably get started. And I think somebody from the Bible study committee probably has, or I can say it, I suppose. Since it's the last one, there's a survey, I think, on your sheet, or on your table, right? Or not? Or aren't there surveys? Maybe not. Not yet. Okay, then I won't make an announcement about that. Last week here today, I don't know the last time I actually preached and taught Bible class on the same Sunday. So. But this is fun. Let's begin. The prayer of the day, I think, was just fitting today, so we'll use that again as our beginning prayer. God, our refuge and strength, have mercy on your church as we come in prayer to thank you for showering 175 years of blessings on Wells. Continue to speak the peace and forgiveness of Christ through us as he lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. All right, today is going to be kind of on the lesson I say a potpourri of Wells history. One of the things we want to do is wrap up what we didn't cover last time, so I'll quick do that. Then I asked for some thought, or if anybody wanted anything to talk about it, and I did have two people who emailed me and asked for a topic they wanted me to talk about. One was Mary Schmall, asking about the transition from German to English, to unfold that a little bit more, talk about that a little bit more. And the other one was from Dr. Carl Kinzel, who watches online. Hi, Dr. Kinzel. Watching from online in Ecuador. He wanted to know more about the Protestant controversy that I touched on just briefly last week. So I'll talk a little more about that. It's a fascinating and, from our perspective, 100 years later, kind of maybe weird story, but we'll talk about that. So maybe one other thing, I know somebody way back in one of the early lessons wanted to know more about, what do we mean by when we talk about confessional Lutheranism? And I think I touched on it a little bit. I think maybe another way to think about it is that, the Wells and a lot of different church bodies say, we believe what the Bible teaches. We preach the Bible. Yeah, Baptists will say that too, Southern Baptists, and we know they teach something different about things like infant baptism, the real presence of Christ's body and blood in the Lord's Supper, end times teachings. A lot of them believe in millennialism, all sorts of different things. So the Lutheran confessions help us to kind of say this is what we are agreeing to teach, believe, teach, and confess. Because the Bible has a lot of stuff in it, and this says here's what, drawn from the Bible, here is what we stand on. Here is what we hold our pastors and teachers to. This is why you can be sure when you get a pastor who subscribes to the Lutheran confessions, you can be sure you're getting a guy who is going to preach and teach what the Bible teaches, and the Lutheran confessions help us kind of say this is what we agree on and this is what we believe it teaches. So that's kind of where the Lutheran confessions can be helpful, particularly giving, I think, confidence to members that the pastor they are getting, the teachers they're getting, that they will be teaching biblical theology. So we have that confidence. All right. We kind of left things off. So last time we talked about after the break with Missouri, the WELS kind of comes into its own. We talked about it in terms of home mission work just exploding. All of a sudden we go from 16 states to all 50. We go from 2 foreign countries to 9 just in the course of a couple of decades. Our ministerial education schools just explode with students and buildings and growth of enrollment and faculty, all that's going on. There's a lot of other things going on in ministry as well, though, too. So, for example, in 1964, I forgot this again. This week in WELS history, today's a great day for church history. October 20th this week, the auditorium at Northwestern College was dedicated, and that's the building that when it was dedicated, the President of the United States, William Howard Taft, sent a telegram. I think I talked about that a few lessons ago. October 22nd, 1868, representatives of the Wisconsin and Missouri synods got together and came to agreement. I think I mentioned that in one of the early lessons as well. October 23rd, 1839, Johann Heinrich Sieker was born. I would call him the first homegrown Wisconsin Synod pastor. He grew up in the Wisconsin Synod. He's the one guy who went to Gettysburg to be trained, came back, served at Salem and Milwaukee. He was the pastor when they built the Landmark Church that's still there. And then he went over to the Minnesota Synod, served as their president for a while. The last place he served was actually New York City. He brought a congregation there into the Missouri Synod and helped found a Concordia College in Bronxville, New York, which only recently closed, not too many years ago. And then finally, 1965, WLCFS, Wisconsin Lutheran Child and Family Service, is dedicated. And actually, we're going to mention that in just a couple minutes. So going back to what I was going to talk about, this potpourri of things, other ministry growth in WELS. 1964 marks the founding of the Lutheran Women's Missionary Society. Kind of, again, sometimes things all work together without even planning it. The LWMS ladies are up there today gathering offerings for their rally, which will be held next week. First national convention was held in 1964. This was the first board. This is one of the early meetings they had in that flag ceremony they always do. That is a long history in LWMS. They used to have the national convention at congregations, but they've outgrown that, of course, and so now it's usually at some kind of convention center. They get anywhere from, I think, 700 to over 1,000 people will attend that every year. Just the support they give, lay-led support of our mission work in WELS. One of the things that was happening, when we kind of relied on the Missouri Synod prior to this to do a lot of what we call special ministries. Ministry to people who are hard of hearing or who are visually impaired or might have special needs of various kinds, or ministry to the military, all these kinds of things. How do we organize that? How do we oversee that? In 1973, the man on the right, Alphonse Wolt, was called to be the first administrator of special ministries. That's there with his wife there at his installation. And so that kind of becomes a new thing in WELS ministry. And so you'll have various outreach to the military, service to the military. We'll have chaplains either going over to Vietnam or eventually a regular civilian chaplain stationed in Germany. And so we've had pastors who've gone over there. In fact, Pastor Carl Otto with a K was actually the first one who went there in the early 70s, and then there have been successive ones ever since. One of my classmates got assigned there in 1995 to serve, and he was there for about 5 years or so. And so that's been an ongoing thing. This is a few guys at a class, sign language class at Northwestern College. So again, reaching out to those who are visually impaired. WLCFS, 1965. Here's a picture of their dedication from that day. Various institutional ministries like that. How can we serve those in various challenging situations, or for some it might be chaplains like Steve Stern serving at going to hospitals and prisons and different things like that. This special ministries oversaw that, but also more localized groups in our synod kind of formed those. So there's one in Wisconsin, there's one in Madison, there was at one time Michigan had one, Minnesota. Various institutional ministries like that get formed as well. 1973 also, Wisconsin Lutheran College gets founded. It was a group of laymen, lay people. I think also some pastors were involved. The desire to have a college in the Milwaukee area. After that junior teachers college closed, there were some who wanted to keep that kind of thing going. And so in 1973, they opened. Eventually they purchased, I don't know if I included a picture of that. They got Dr. Gary Greenfield was called to be the first president. Eventually they bought the campus that they are on. It had been a Catholic institution. I think it was for, what would they call it? Wayward girls, I think was the term that was used. Basically, women who got, young girls who got pregnant before out of wedlock, they go there. They were closing. WLC bought the campus. There are still, I guess you could say, vestiges of the original buildings are still there. The fact that they have a chapel is one of the kind of indicators of that. I remember when they used to have an in-ground swimming pool actually outside the main building. My piano teacher growing up when I was in grade school also taught piano at WLC, and a couple of times she had our recitals there. So I remember playing in a couple of piano recitals in their chapel. So WLC is one. 1974 marked the first WELS International Youth Rally. In, of all places, Ottawa, Canada, which is why you could legitimately say it's an international youth rally. It was the congregation there, kind of the story behind this is interesting. St. Paul's Lutheran in Ottawa had been a Missouri Synod congregation. And they had been very active in the Missouri Synod's youth organization. They called it, I think it was called the Walther League. Well, they came to the Wisconsin Synod in the early 70s, and they wanted to keep that sort of thing going. And so it was a lot of people at their congregation who organized the first WELS International Youth Rally. So this is the group. I think it was like 300 were there at the first one, and that's in front of the, I think it's the Canadian Parliament building, if I'm not mistaken. So, and of course, now that they get 3,000 youth will get together at our WELS International Youth Rallies. The 1970s also, oh, go ahead.
That's my home congregation.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, and so I was there.
At that?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
awesome.
Helen and Ernie Starr, we were Missouri Synod, and they carried over that
Walther.
enthusiasm about the Walther League.
Yep,
You know,
yep.
said, we need to do this.
Yeah, she pointed out. She was there at that first one. That was her home congregation. That's great. I know that one of our new faculty members at the seminary who works with the Pastoral Studies Institute is Skip Getzinger, and he was pastor there for a long time and now came to the seminary. But he was happy when we included this story in the book because he got me connected to some people to get some of these pictures. And so I think we even included a handwritten thank you note that a teenager wrote to host families or something at this youth rally. So the 1970s also saw 11 new area Lutheran high schools formed. Now here's the thing, can I name all 11? This one's Michigan Lutheran High School in St. Joe's, Michigan. We got Shoreland gets started, Kettle Moraine Lutheran, Arizona Lutheran Academy. That's what's interesting. We start new schools in more outlying districts or outlying areas. Evergreen Lutheran High School, West Lutheran up in the Twin Cities, Nebraska Lutheran, Northland Lutheran, Minnesota Valley Lutheran. Nope, they were in the 50s. They were already going. I'm up to 9. Okay. California Lutheran High School. And what's my last one? Shoreland, we already got that, I already mentioned that one, the Racine, Kenosha area. That one comes in the 80s. There's, oh boy, maybe it is only 10. I'm pretty sure it's 11. Oh, I got it. It was called Huron Valley Lutheran over in the Detroit area. That's my 11th one, yeah. Others, like people mentioned, Illinois Lutheran was started in the 80s. Eventually we get one in South Dakota, Great Plains Lutheran High School in the 90s, and there have been a few others since then. But this, in the 1970s, just saw just a 11 in one decade is quite a few. And the fact that some of them are starting in, California, Arizona, Washington, Nebraska, these outlying districts. Minnesota Valley Lutheran in the New Ulm area got started because we moved the prep school there to Prairie du Chien. And the folks in New Ulm still wanted a high school in the area, so they started Minnesota Valley Lutheran. So we get all these new Lutheran high schools started as well. A number of important publications also were published soon, kind of in the 70s, moving into the 80s. We got a new catechism in 1982. Anybody pretty much younger than me would have had this catechism, right? It was referred to often as the Kuski Catechism because the author of it was Professor David Kuski, who had been at Wisconsin Lutheran Seminary. And so this was the catechism used until just recently, when we published a new one. 2017 is when the new dark blue one came out. And so some of the younger, if there's some younger teenagers, younger kids here, have probably used that one more recently. So also a hymnal, 1983, the Synod decided they didn't like. Some other Lutheran church bodies were publishing hymnals. The Lutheran hymnal by this time was getting 40 years old. The language was archaic with the old King James type language. We're starting to use NIV more. And so we decided we're going to publish our own hymnal and called Kurt Eggert in 1983 to be the project director. It took 10 years. That hymnal took 10 years to develop. There was a sampler halfway through. Some of you might be of an age that you remember that blue sampler that had a couple dozen hymns and some sample liturgy and so on, kind of a test run, and then Christian Worship came out. This kind of finally came out in 93. What is remarkable about Christian Worship, I would say, in the 93 hymnal is how widespread it was accepted in Wells quickly. I think within 2-3 years, like 90% of the congregations in Wells were using it, which is phenomenal. I mean, the Missouri Synod's 1982 hymnal, I don't think ever got past 60 to 65% usage. You could tell Wells was waiting for a new one, and I think they did a pretty good job. And now we got another new one. Yep.
The congregation that housed the parochial school I went to stopped until the Lutheran service book was introduced. Both the TLA hymnal and the Lutheran worship. Yeah.
Okay. He was mentioning that he grew up in Missouri Synod, and he said that their church kind of kept a stockpile of both of them.
Not just in the back to bring out
Every pew had both. Yeah. Okay. That must have made things confusing on what hymn you're going to sing and what number.
Yeah.
But I know the Lutheran worship that what the Missouri Synod put out was it was a bit of a rush job, I think, is what I heard. It was like they decided they didn't like the one that the other Lutheran church body, the more liberal ones, were putting out, and so it's now the late 70s, and they put it together in like 3 years, I think. And a lot of it was the work of one individual. Paul Bunges, I think, did a lot of the work on that 82 Missouri Synod hymnal. But so you just see these different things. People's Bibles started coming out also in the early 1980s. This was one of the first issues or first volumes. Again, something our synod decided we can do this. We can produce materials like this. And the People's Bible series actually was so well received that the Missouri Synod, CP Concordia Publishing House, actually bought the rights to publish it under their name too, down the road later. So just kind of interesting. So that's what I had for kind of things that are going on in our synod that just demonstrate that Wells had come into its own. that even though we broke with Missouri, and for a long time we had always relied on Big Brother Mo to do a lot of stuff. But now we severed ties with them and demonstrated that we could do this too. We could do some of these things too, and by God's grace we were able to. And that has continued until this day. So, any other questions on this topic before I kind of turn the clock back a little bit? Shout out, please. Yes, please.
Just a quick question. You had mentioned something about the special ministries.
Yes.
Can you do a little talk a little bit about the Jesus Cares and some of those types of programs?
Sure. She's asking about other special ministries like Jesus Cares program. So maybe another example of a special ministry that was actually a little more I think Wisconsin Synod, or actually its original, Jesus Cares came out of the Lutheran Home Association in Belle Plaine, Minnesota. The Lutheran Home in Belle Plaine dates back to, I think, the 1890s. A pastor named Karl Gausewitz was actually very influential in starting that. Karl Gausewitz eventually was pastor at Grace. He wrote a catechism that I'm going to be pointing out to in just a second. But he was influential in getting that Lutheran home started. And it was through that Lutheran Home Association that the Jesus Cares ministry got going, which is, I'd say, the biggest thing, producing materials, worship resources, catechism material, educational resources for people with developmental disabilities, special needs in that regard. And so, in fact, Pastor Joel Gertner is the current special needs or special ministries administrator at our synod. And I would always, when I used to teach the education course to the seniors at the seminary, I would always bring him into class for one day. I'd turn the class over to him for one class period, and he would talk about Jesus Cares ministry. He would kind of demonstrate how the service goes, things like that Jesus Cares does. And so a number of our congregations in Wells have regularly a Jesus Cares service. Sometimes it's on a monthly basis. Sometimes it's every couple of weeks. But it's an effort to bring in, reach another audience. Did I answer your question? Okay. Anybody else? My eyesight isn't the greatest, so I don't always see the hands. But all right, if I don't, oh, sure, go ahead.
So with this big growth of high schools, are there still new high schools opening?
I was asking about, are there still new high schools opening? There have been in recent years. I should have mentioned, so there's a Divine Savior Academy down in Doral, Florida. They have also started another high school in the Houston area within the last few years. Apostles Lutheran Church in San Jose, California has kind of started their own high school out of their church. So there are a few, and then of course Kingdom Prep Lutheran High School here in Milwaukee is a fairly recent, I think it maybe founded maybe 5-6 years ago. So there have been in recent years, yep. All right, let's turn the clock back about 115, 20 years. Talk about the transition from German to English. Almost all of our congregations, I would say for the first 50 years of our synod's history, did all of their ministry in German. Probably a few exceptions. I actually know that Salem in Milwaukee was an exception. They were doing English services already as far back as the 1860s because a number of their members who had started that church had actually come from Pennsylvania. They were still German, but they had been in America for a while. They migrated from Pennsylvania to Milwaukee area, to Granville, as they would have called it then, northwest Milwaukee. And there was always a desire to have an English-speaking pastor so they could have services in German and in English. But for the most part, most of our churches were almost entirely German. But as we start to get into the early 20th century, and as we're starting churches, say, out in the Pacific Northwest and Arizona in the early 20th century, and you've got generations of people you've got a couple generations now who have grown up in America, there is a growing desire to do ministry more and more in English. So in 1912, a catechism was published by the Wisconsin Synod a bilingual catechism. This is what it looked like. German on the left side, English on the right. The catechism was written by, you see there, C. Gausewitz, the Gausewitz I just talked about. He was pastor by this time at Grace in Milwaukee. He died in, I think it was 1927 or 28, on a Sunday morning. When the bells rang for the first service at Grace that morning, the pastor didn't come out. The usher went back to the sacristy, and Pastor Gausewitz had died at his desk chair with his Bible open in front of him. And the usher, from what I understand, told the congregation, "The pastor has died. You can all go home." I guess they didn't know what else to do. But anyway, Pastor Gausewitz writes this catechism. So you've got this bilingual catechism now that's available. In about 1912 as well, the Synod published a very small English hymnal. It was called the Church Hymnal. It only had like 130 hymns. A few years later, they came out with a little bit larger hymnal called the Book of Hymns that had about 325 hymns. So it's more. So we're producing some English resources, but congregations, it's a slow move. By the way, that bilingual catechism in the 1950s gets edited. And that's the catechism. How many of you are familiar with this? Were familiar with this catechism growing up? I will raise my hand as well. I was one of the last classes to use the TAN catechism, as we would have called it. But it's a revision of that bilingual one without the German. But World War I was really a challenge. The anti-German sentiment in America was there and was a thing. And so I think it helped to accelerate the move to English in our congregations. So I think I told the story last time. I know, and I guess maybe St. John's is an illustration of this too. I have some dates there for you. 1905, the first teacher called to teach English at school. So I think it kind of started a lot of times in the schools. English is starting to be taught, but German would have still been taught too. Somewhere along the line, Mr. Scheibe sent me these dates. I'm guessing somewhere between 1905 and 1929, you start to have some English language services. I know in Manitowoc, where I was pastor at First German Lutheran Church, they started English, I think, in 1912, once a week, Sunday evenings. A couple years later, it went to twice a week, Sunday evenings. A couple years later, it was once a week, or it was every week, middle service on Sundays. And somewhere in the 20s, it flipped. So that first and third service were English, the middle service was German. And they continued that German service until, I think, the early 1960s. And so what you have there with St. John's is kind of a thing that a lot of churches went through with that transition from English to German, or German to English. And again, I think World War I helped to accelerate that. By World War II, it really wasn't an issue because our churches were almost all operating primarily in English by then. It's kind of interesting, at the seminary, German was still the language of instruction well into the 1930s. And even at our synodical meetings, I look back at the proceedings, so the published proceedings of synod conventions, so the reports and all that. It's funny how it's almost entirely German until you get to the early 20s, and then every so often there'll be like one report or two reports will be in English, and then you get later in the 20s and there's a few more reports in English, but it's not until really the mid-30s where the majority is in English. So at a synodical level, we were a little slower to move from the German to the English. With the World War I thing, though, it did cause some difficulties, particularly at Dr. Martin Luther College in New Ulm. You have to understand, New Ulm in the 19 teens, New Ulm is still a very German, a lot of German heritage in New Ulm. Their Oktoberfest every year is huge. They run it for 2 separate weekends, and one of the weekends always seems to be in the same weekend as MLC Homecoming, which means you can't get a hotel room in New Ulm if you want to go there. But it does give you something to do at night after the football game. And they have a Schell's brewery. You know, they have a German brewery there. You know, it's just a very German thing, and it was back then too. And Dr. Martin Luther College, almost everything was being done in German yet, and so this anti-German sentiment is kind of there, and there's pushback in New Ulm and the surrounding areas of New Ulm, to the point where there were pro-German, I don't know if pro-German is the right way to say it, maybe it would be anti-German rallies. Kind of like, let's not be so anti-German. In fact, maybe we should, before 1917 when we entered the war, it was like maybe we should not enter the war. Maybe we should be careful here. And the unfortunate thing was this guy, Adolf Ackerman, who was the president of DMLC, got very active in these rallies. In fact, speaking publicly, to the point that the Minnesota Public Safety Board contacted the college and our synod and said, yeah, you gotta do something about this guy. This isn't gonna fly. And so Ackerman resigned his call as the president of Dr. Martin Luther College. Interestingly, the guy they called to replace him was J.P. Meyer, who a few years later got called to our seminary and then served at our seminary for like 44 years. I've always joked that twice in the early 1900s, presidents of DMLC, New Ulm, took calls to the seminary. Fast forward 100 years, in 2007, Mark Zarling, who was a professor at the seminary, accepted the call to be president of MLC. And then in 19 or 20, when he retired, Rich Gergel, who was a professor at the seminary, got called to be the president at MLC. So I joke that we're even now. It took us over 100 years, or it took us about 100 years, but it's like when they make baseball trade, the player to be named later. Gergel and Zarling were the players to be named later. It just took a while for that to happen. But anyway, I digress. Ackerman, you kind of see the kind of things that are going on with this transition to English. And he did get called to congregations in Minnesota and eventually was the Minnesota district president for about a dozen years or so. So it's not that he was completely disgraced in our synod. It just, for the good of the ministry, he needed to resign at DMLC. So it was a thing that our congregations had to deal with, some of our pastors and teachers had to deal with, and I think, like I said, World War I kind of accelerated that transition. All right, that's that story. All right. Maybe I'll field any questions on that first before I go on to, sure.
I seem to remember reading somewhere that German was actually, there were some laws passed against teaching German in schools in some states. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Laws that were passed against German being taught in school. Maybe it wasn't so much against German, but it was for English. And in fact, I suppose that's another story I could quickly tell. In the 1880s, in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin state legislature passed and the governor signed what came to be known as the Bennett Law. The Bennett Law was going to require a number of things of schools, whether you were a public school or a parochial or a non-public, so parochial school. You were going to have class for a certain number of hours a day, a certain number of days a year, and you had to teach certain subjects in English. English, American history, I think were two of those subjects. And one other part of the law that raised some concerns was that you needed to go to the school within your school district. And of course, if you are a parochial school, you kind of draw from a lot of people that may be outside of that district. And so this raised a lot of concerns in the late 1880s not only in the Wisconsin Synod, but also in the Missouri Synod and even the Catholics. And what ended up happening, and this is probably the one and only time this happened in our synod's history, we kind of got a little political. Besides making preparations in case we had to make these changes, we kind of encouraged our members, the synod did, to vote for the party when elections came up that would overturn this law, which meant actually back then you were actually voting for the Democrats, that they would be the ones who would overturn this law. And so the next election, I think it was in 1890 then, this tells you just kind of the voting bloc in Wisconsin that was German immigrants. The governor got ousted, the state legislature got totally flipped, and the law got overturned. So the one and only time when we got kind of political. J.P. Kaler, who writes our history, our early Wisconsin Synod history, kind of said maybe that wasn't the best move. Perhaps better would have been, let's use the court system, because it was probably not constitutional to make those kinds of requirements, but they went that route. We haven't again since, to that extent, but it was just kind of interesting how 1880s you got these Germans who are, we're going to fight for our rights in this way. So, all right, I'm going to talk next about the Protestant controversy. I am convinced this controversy could have only happened when it did, and could have only happened in the Wisconsin Synod. And I say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, this transition to English was a thing. It was unsettling to a lot of people in a lot of congregations. So you got that aspect. 1917, the synods had just merged. Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan had merged, Nebraska had merged to form, basically reorganized, merged, and now you have districts. So the Michigan district, Minnesota district, and the 3 districts in Wisconsin. Problem with that, though, is that, first of all, you have inexperienced leadership in the Wisconsin districts, because the other districts, the president just became the new district president, but now you have to elect new district officers who are inexperienced. Plus, it took a while to figure out different policies, different procedures that we take for granted now, like our call procedure, there's different forms, or district appeals, things like that. Didn't have that then. So they're kind of feeling their way through things. Another thing, 1920, within the course of about a month or so, 2 seminary professors died from the flu, Spanish flu. John Schaller, the president, and Herman Meyer. And that's when J.P. Meyer got called from DMLC to the seminary to replace his brother Herman, who had died. And so that was a little unsettling to the synod, to lose 2, that was half the faculty that you're losing in one fell swoop in 1920. And that left 2 guys, Kaler and Pieper. Kaler's the one on the right, J.P. Kaler, and August Pieper on the left, both very gifted professors, very popular very kind of just big personalities, and they didn't always get along well with each other. And so factions kind of started developing among the students, and then among the pastors. Are you a Kaler guy or are you a Pieper guy? So you kind of have that sort of thing going on as well. In the broader world, it's the Roaring *20s. Coming out of World War I, the Roaring '20s in America, the flappers, you've got the advent of the automobile is coming, and just all this technological change, a lot of societal change. Immorality is a little bit more flaunted. It's the time of prohibition and the time of gangsters who are elevated in the eyes of the country, and there's kind of a looking down on authority kind of mindset in America. So all that's in the mix here. And then in 1924, and it's just like it's like a number of disparate events that sort of all transpire to blow things up. It started innocently enough in Watertown at Northwestern when about, I think it was like 27 students on it was March, unexpected snowstorm kind of shuts everything down on a Friday, and the tutors uncover a thievery ring that has been going on among the students, primarily the high school students. They've been stealing stuff from the town stores and even from some of the other students, and they uncover this. It's the dead of winter, the phone lines are down, can't call the parents or anything. The tutors initially take care of investigations, and then they get the president involved. There's no dean of students at the time, and faculty holds a big meeting when school resumes. Actually, they cancel classes so the faculty could have these meetings and investigate everything and interview everybody, and eventually they hand down discipline, and it's somewhat harsh. I think it was a third of the students were expelled permanently, a third were expelled for the rest of the year, a third were campused or something like that. Well, then the board got involved. And technically, the board had the final say on disciplinary matters. And the board overturned the faculty's decision. And several members of the faculty didn't feel good about that, and in fact resigned. One of them, the guy on the right, was Carl Kaler, the son of J.P. Kaler, the seminary professor. The other one was a guy named Herbert Parisius, who, fascinatingly enough, eventually ended up with a high-ranking position in the Department of Agriculture in FDR's administration. He was a Wisconsin Synod pastor, and then a Protestant pastor. He was pastor up in Rice Lake, but then he got involved in governmental work in agriculture in Wisconsin and did so well that he came to the attention of national kind of and got elected to some things. The next thing you know, I think they had an article about him in Time magazine or something like that in the 40s during World War II. So you never know what you're going to run into in history. But anyway, these two guys resigned. So that's thing number one. Down the road in Fort Atkinson, St. Paul's Fort Atkinson, there were a couple of young teachers there, this is one of them, who felt that their pastor wasn't speaking out loudly enough against the ills of society. Like, I suppose some of it would have been maybe use of alcohol or something, but the way the girls were dressing, about the ladies' aid in the church having a bake sale or something. There were things like that. They felt the students weren't being disciplined enough, and the pastor should be speaking out more against this in his sermons and everything. And the pastor kind of tried to tell these young ladies, some of this is adiaphora, and maybe you're getting a little too worked up about this. And they got so upset. They started calling their pastor a false prophet. And the pastor was a pretty easygoing guy, but if you get called a false prophet, that might get you a little more upset. And then they also were like telling their students, they don't have to go to church. They stopped going to church, and they didn't like some of the things the choir was singing. It was all this kind of stuff. So they're under discipline by St. Paul's Fort Atkinson, but all of a sudden they get a call to Marshfield, Wisconsin, and accept it while they're under discipline. And how does that happen? That would never happen today. And it was even in the same district. I don't know what the district, but things weren't, like I said, things weren't always completely figured out yet. And because of that, eventually, and I think actually one of these teachers eventually served actually at St. John's for a brief time too after this. But they end up getting suspended from the synod. It gets announced that way. And not everybody in the Western Wisconsin district likes this, and they start protesting, hence the name Protestant controversy. It also doesn't help that a young professor at the seminary, Gerhard Riediger, starts sticking his nose into all this stuff. and starts speaking out against the synod and synod officials in the classroom, he ends up getting suspended, and some people protest that happened. Again, you can see where the name Protestant, that's why it's spelled the way it is, Protestant controversy, not Protestant controversy, Protestant controversy. Then you have, a little quote there. This is from Riediger. This gives you a little feel for kind of what he's talking about. We have come to the point in the Wisconsin Synod where we have not very much life left. We have threshed out doctrines, we have made confessions, and we are just about at the end of our power. We have come to this point where one, if he wants to enter heaven, has to enter it by force. It's almost impossible at the present time to be saved. This is what I preach to my boys. One of the things they were talking about is the Wisconsin Synod under the judgment of hardening. That's kind of what you had some of these Protestants saying, that we have hardened our hearts to the Word of God, is what they were accusing things. And that kind of comes out in a paper, conference paper, that this guy writes, a guy named Bites. What's his first name again? Do I have it there? I just don't have it. His name was Bites. Last name was Bites. He presents this paper up in the Wausau area, and I think also in somewhere up in Wisconsin Rapids area, and then it gets presented in Watertown, and it makes sweeping judgments about the synods, about preaching, about catechism teaching, about what's being taught to students at the seminary. He's just kind of accusing the synod of not, you're preaching too much justification, kind of it came out, just too much justification, not enough sanctification kind of thing. We're not being repentant enough, those kinds of things. And it becomes kind of a lightning rod. There's people who thought he said, pretty good stuff here. Others were saying, there's some problems here. And the district praesidium, the district president in Western Wisconsin district, didn't know what to do with it. And so he asked the faculty of the seminary, can you provide us with an official theological opinion? They called it a Gutachten, was the fancy German name for it. Can you give us this on this paper? And so the plan was to have each of the 4 professors write their evaluation of it, and then they would meet together, they would compare notes, they would figure out, okay, what's the best way to kind of merge the thing together, do a collaborative work kind of thing there. Well, 3 of the 4 got it done. Kaler, the one guy on the right, who was actually the seminary president, didn't finish the assignment. He gave the assignment but didn't finish it. Partly because he was very busy working on the plans for our current seminary campus in Mequon. So that was also being in the works at the same time. So this Gutachten gets written, and this also contributes to the controversy because Kaler initially signs his name to that opinion and later withdraws it because he doesn't like how it was used. It becomes sort of a lightning rod. If you agree with this, you're good. If you disagree with it, you're going to be suspended from the ministry, from the ministerium. And so then more people are protesting. And this protesting group eventually gets together and kind of forms their own thing. They call it the Protestant Conference, and they even start publishing their own publication called Faith Life, which until just a few years ago was published 6 times a year, is when it would come out. You can still, our seminary library has every copy of it. A big thing about it was relitigating all that happened in the 1920s. They wanted to reopen all the investigations. They wanted to revisit all the suspensions that had taken place of various pastors and teachers, mainly pastors, I would say. They have long just criticized anything going on in the Wisconsin Synod is kind of what ends up happening with Faith Life over the years. They did do some good stuff. They did translate and publish some stuff written by J.P. Kaler, including his history of the Wisconsin Synod that covered basically 1850 to the 1920s. So they did do some stuff like that, but otherwise they've been kind of always, they were always kind of this thorn in the side of the synod, this faith life and the Protestant controversy and conference. And the whole thing ends up leading to the suspension of J.P. Kaler, because he continues to side with these Protestants and eventually and starts speaking out against his colleagues on the faculty. So he gets suspended in 1929, temporarily. I guess maybe I should say it this way. He was given a leave of absence. So for the first year of our seminary on the Mequon campus, J.P. Kaler, the guy who is, I would say, an architectural influence of that building, of that campus, lived on the campus but did not teach. And the next year, he was suspended from the synod and moved, and his call was terminated, and he left and moved in with his son in Neillsville, Wisconsin, and lived out his life there, continuing to write and things like that. And so it was, this whole Protestant controversy is somewhat of a tragedy, I guess you could say, in our synod's history that we weathered. We lost several Northwestern professors, two seminary professors. I would say we lost probably about 30 plus congregations, some of which came back eventually. The one in Manitowoc, Emmanuel in Manitowoc, came back in the late 1960s, which is why we ended up having for a while two Wells churches 6 blocks from each other, because they had started another mission not too far away when that church had left. But so you kind of have, it was kind of a difficult time. And it also, our professors were very reluctant to publish books for a while because of that, because they figured anything we publish, these Protestants are just going to tear it to shreds, and we don't want to deal with that. And so it really wasn't until, I'd say, the 1960s, 1970s, that we finally start to have seminary professors publishing more. So like a J.P. Meyer or Karl Lavrens, Mary's father, they really should have written some books, but there was just kind of a reluctance to do that. Eventually, some books got published posthumously, but of collecting their writings and editing them and so on. But this was kind of just, it was a tough time, and we learned from it. We learned, I think they learned the need to be more patient, be more patient with dealing with people. I think they kind of maybe reacted too quickly with some of the suspensions. I think they also, and I think that maybe carried over to the break with Missouri, that we were much more patient with Missouri. I think there were other factors as well, but I think maybe that was a contributing factor. So the Protestant controversy, something that it just affected the Wisconsin Synod, did not affect the ELS, did not affect Missouri, just affected us. Very uniquely Wisconsin Synod thing. So there you have it in like 15 minutes. I hope that's good enough for Dr. Kinzel. So. Any other questions about that? I have like a minute or two. One thing I was going to talk about was various, at the end if I needed more time to fill. I was going to talk about different leaders in our synod. I think of the theological leaders. We had men like Haneke. I mentioned Pieper and Kaler, John Schaller, J.P. Meyer, Mary Schmall's father there, Karl Lavrens, Siegbert Becker, who wrote numerous books and was a very popular lecturer, even among lay people. He would give lectures to different groups of lay people at times. This picture, I like this picture because it showed the 4 living presidents back in 2014 of the seminary. So the one in the far upper right is Paul Wentland. He was the president at the time. To his left was David Valesky, who's still out in California, retired pastor. I think he's almost 90 now. And he used to be a member here, directed the choir here, I believe, in fact, at one time. When he was a professor here, he was a member at St. John's. The one on the bottom right is Armand Panning. He died a few years ago. He was president when I was a student. And then the one on the left is my grandfather, Armand Schutze, who served as a professor from 1958 till 1990, as president from, I think, 78 to 84 or 85. He died in 2020 at the age of 102. So My granddaughters were in church today, and my oldest granddaughter's baptism, we were able to get I think it's a 5-generation picture with my grandpa, my mom, myself, my daughter, and our little granddaughter, so it's kind of neat. Brueggen Bivens. We got the Bivens daughter back there. So they longtime professors as well at the seminary. John Brenner, who retired just recently. Professor Daniel Deutschlander, one of my favorites, my favorite professor in college. Arnold Kelpine, longtime professor at DMLC and MLC. More recently, if you want language guys, Eichmann and Nass and Joel Frederick. Joel Frederick is still teaching at MLC. Nass just retired as the longtime Hebrew professor. I had Eichmann as Hebrew professor. Just men that the Lord raised up in our church body to serve in that way. People we can be grateful for their gifts and their service to our synod. I think I'm out of time. I believe now there are surveys on your tables. Fill them out and hand them, or leave them there, right? Just leave them there. And it's been a privilege to teach this class. I just have so much fun talking about WELS history. Maybe you get that impression too. But I enjoy it, and I hope to be back sometime.